What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Spectator Sports. I'm your host, Sebastian Fonseca. This is episode number 93. The NFL offseason has started. That means we got trades, we have free agency deals to recap. But before we get into it, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. If you're new to the channel, like this video, subscribe to the channel. If you haven't done so before, really helps us grow. Take a look at our Instagram and TikTok pages. You can get the audio from this podcast on Spotify. All links are in the description, and you can get clips from this podcast here on YouTube as well. The biggest dominoes that usually fall in the NFL offseason are QB movement. And a couple years ago, we saw a bevy of moves all over the league. And the first domino to fall in the 2024 offseason is Kirk Cousins leaving the Minnesota Vikings to go to Atlanta. In a stunning move, this was his first free agent meeting. That means they get the first chance to take a look at Kirk, see where that Achilles is, and they offered him a big sum of money, 4 years, $180 million. And what this means is that Kirk has decided to leave somewhere that he's been for about 6-7 years and leave for greener pastures, as there are a lot of attractive weapons out there in Atlanta. We have Drake London, you have Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts. Now Atlanta has some stability at quarterback. They were going years, even at the end of the Matt Ryan era, where they didn't seem to have the best quarterback in the division. Tampa Bay certainly will be a big test. I think Tampa's defense is still one of the best in this division, if not the NFC. Baker Mayfield has just re-signed as well, so they regain that component. They have Mike Evans as well. And the offense remains the same. You have the same coaching staff. So this is going to be Atlanta's biggest test now with this new quarterback in Kirk Cousins to see what they can do in the NFC South. It is still a very weak division. Panthers haven't done anything special in years. The Saints haven't done a lot either. They are still a very old roster. So don't expect the Saints or Panthers to really contend for this division. It's going to come down to the Falcons and probably the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I still think the Falcons still have some work to do on the defensive side, but offensive line is pretty solid. Could use a piece or two, but Raheem Morris is off to a great start, and he hasn't even coached the game, but the roster right now is setting himself up for success in Atlanta. With Minnesota losing Kirk Cousins, they decided to sign Sam Darnold, and Sam Darnold isn't the greatest option out there, but certainly gets another quarterback on the roster. But this really makes them a big candidate to move up in the NFL draft. There's a lot of quarterbacks. We know probably Caleb Williams will be going at the top overall pick. Drake May maybe to follow with Washington, but still three pretty good quarterback prospects: Michael Penix Jr., Bo Nix, and JJ McCarthy. Those three are going to be very good options in the middle round, if not even in the top 10. A lot of teams may look to move up in this draft. I think the candidates to move down would be a team like the Chargers, who already have their quarterback. They could use more picks as well as they try to even out this roster and get out of salary cap hell with some younger talent. So they could be prime candidates to move down, and a team like the Minnesota Vikings could make a move up to take one of these quarterbacks. And sure, Sam Darnold may get the snaps to start the year, but it definitely feels like he would be a bridge quarterback to the new regime at QB. The biggest piece out of all this is what happens with Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson's up for a massive contract extension. He's put up numbers since entering the league in 2020, but that doesn't mean that he may want to stay in Minnesota. Minnesota can offer him another year and then give him a massive contract. But is it up to Minnesota's best interest to load up on an asset that you can maybe get another treasure trove of picks, because everybody could use a wide receiver in this league just like Justin Jefferson? And if I'm also Justin Jefferson, do I want to sign with the Minnesota Vikings? Like you saw last year when Kirk Cousins was out, it was a mixture of a bunch of backup quarterbacks there. Now, while their head coach would be pretty good in calling plays, it still comes down to who's going to run this offense. And I feel like Justin Jefferson could get frustrated with this. It's only a matter of time before he is due with that massive deal that could happen this offseason probably. And it would really make sense for them to trade them. They get the picks, and maybe he gets a big contract, but just with a different team that has aspirations of winning. Who knows what will happen as the offseason unfolds? Things are evolving day to day with the market, but I think there's a very big possibility that they could be trading Justin Jefferson to a team that could use a receiver and hope that this helps jumpstart their rebuild. The Eagles made a splash of moves. It started off with some smaller news with Landon Dickerson re-signing, extending his deal, leaving him a Philadelphia Eagles for another 4 years. The free agent signings were big splashes. Bryce Huff, who isn't a well-known commodity, at least for the casual NFL fan, but the fact that this guy can come off the bench and give you about 10 sacks a year is pretty good. He did that last season, and now can he replicate that in a new scheme in Philadelphia? Vic Fangio, the new DC coming in for Sean Desai last year, and Matt Patricia will be different. And now he's addressed something on the front end with Bryce Huff, and it remains to be seen whether or not they'll keep Josh Sweat and or Hassan Reddick. I believe one of the two will be shopped and traded later in this offseason for some picks, as they both were not as what they were in 2022. If they do so, I would like to keep Hassan Reddick. I think he's a more productive player, but to get Bryce Huff at about $17 million a year is pretty much a bargain in this day and age for edge rushers. Now, remains to be seen, can he do this again? But with the amount of talent they have at the D-line, you have Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Hassan Reddick, Graham is coming back for another year. That is some pretty good defensive line pressure coming at any opposing quarterback. So with that being said, I like the Bryce Huff move, but the biggest splash of all is the Eagles signing Saquon Barkley away from the rival New York Giants. It's a 3-year deal worth about $38 million with $26 million guaranteed, as Saquon was fighting for a deal like this for the last offseason. Last year, they franchised him as in the New York Giants and then later signed a 1-year deal. He was banged up last year, but still fairly productive, not quite at the 2022 level, but still fairly productive, played most of the season. Health will be a big thing for Saquon. We know that he's missed 2 full seasons basically, and injuries have been plaguing him in the last few years of his Giants career, and that's probably why the Giants didn't elect to extend him. But it wasn't really personal, it's business at the end of the day. Now going to a division rival certainly puts salt in the wound for the New York Giants and their fan base. But for Saquon, this brings him the financial stability, especially in a running back position that's so devalued these last few off seasons. What does this mean for the Eagles offense? They brought in Kellen Moore in this off season, and it's definitely going to be an upgrade compared to what they had last year. And I really like that with this move, Saquon Barkley, this is kind of like what the Eagles are trying to mimic with the San Francisco 49ers 2 years ago. They traded for Christian McCaffrey. He is their bell cow running back, and that takes up so much pressure off of everybody else. Defenses have to pay attention now to Saquon. There's still really good receivers on the outside. They have 2 stud receivers, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, a solid tight end in Dallas Goedert, and still, despite the recent retirement of Jason Kelce, one of the best offensive lines in this league. I expect them to continue to bolster up that depth as Kelce retires, and we'll see probably Lane Johnson be on the last stage of his career, but still fairly productive offensive tackle. And this will be the best offensive line that Saquon has worked with in his NFL career. Before with the New York Giants, they were at the bottom 3 throughout his Giants career in generating open rushing lanes. He was the most hit running back behind the line of scrimmage that we've seen since entering the league in 2018. And what this means for Saquon is that with this really good offensive line, he won't be touched possibly for 1 to 2 yards. And with those massive quads that he has, he can drive defenders back for another additional 1 to 2 yards. And that's how you get that 4 yards per carry average, ride the rock. Jalen Hurts is a far more talented quarterback than what he's had to work with out in New York. So that takes some pressure off of him. Defenses have to pay attention to him and his running ability. This offense is loaded, and I'm very excited to see what they can do. So many weapons, so many people that you have to pay attention to that it's going to be very hard to stop. And they still have some moves to do on the back end. I still understand that, but I already love what I'm seeing out of Howie Roseman's team and the Philadelphia Eagles in this offseason. I'm sure they'll be primed to threaten the San Francisco 49ers in the upcoming 2024 season. Last offseason, the Giants made this big mistake, and I've said this time in and time out that signing Daniel Jones to the long-term deal was a mistake. And with that move, the domino effect was tagging Saquon Barkley. Now, a year later, Saquon Barkley walks at the hands of a division rival, and you're stuck with Daniel Jones. But Daniel Jones isn't even healthy. He is still recovering from that ACL injury that he suffered last year. And you're stuck with this big deal, and you do have the 6th overall pick, so that is maybe a way out, at least from right now, to get a signal caller of the future. You know that Brian Daboll is here to stay. He is one of the best play callers in recent memory in the NFL. He just needs a quarterback to operate his system and his ideologies as an offensive mind in this league. Now, on the other side, I do like that they brought in Brian Burns to bolster that D-line. Now, that with Dexter Lawrence and Kayvon Thibodeau, that is a very talented defensive line. However, that doesn't mean that their offense will be any good. Last year, with the rotation pieces that they had, the wide receivers aren't anything extraordinary, and without Saquon, they're going to need a running back to run the rock. The Giants still have a lot of work to do. I think this is probably a lame duck year for them. The fact is that they don't really have stability at quarterback. They brought in Drew Lock on a free agent deal, and he may take some snaps as the starter temporarily, but it would be really nice to see if they could use that pick and get a quarterback of the future. If not, trade back and see what there is next season. But they definitely need to get younger, fix up this salary cap, because they've really mismanaged some of the biggest positions you can in football. Russell Wilson is joining the Pittsburgh Steelers on a veterans minimum deal. It's a low-risk move for both parties. Russell Wilson is looking to resurrect his career after a very poor stint in Denver with 2 head coaches getting released at the start of the year. And this didn't look like himself out in Denver, even in Sean Payton's system. Now, Pittsburgh isn't anything extraordinary. They are still working to correct some issues that they have offensively. They brought in Arthur Smith as their OC, and maybe he's just better off being a play caller. That was when Ryan Tannehill resurrected his career, so maybe there's some concepts that he can bring in to Pittsburgh now. With that being said, they're going to have to emphasize the running game. Something that's really helped out Russell Wilson's game is play action. He can get out on the move as well and use his legs. Defensively is where their calling card is, and they've just bolstered that up continuously with TJ Watt, and they recently just signed Patrick Queen from Baltimore. That's another good linebacker right there to man the middle of that defense. So defensively, we know that Pittsburgh has what it takes. And that was really the reason how they even snuck into the playoffs last year, with the ability to start 3 different quarterbacks across their roster in the 2023 season. But this time, looking like Russell Wilson will be the guy. I'm sure there's going to be a competition, but it makes sense that Russell Wilson will be the starter. It's just a matter of how effective he will be, because they will absolutely need to emphasize the running game, get Russell Wilson on the move, like I said earlier. Russ doesn't really turn over the ball unless he's being dumb, and I think Russ in Pittsburgh is a really good move. Now, looking at the division as a whole, the Bengals have suffered some losses, and Joe Burrow is still recovering from that wrist injury. Cleveland Browns, you don't know what you're going to get, but certainly is a threat to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Baltimore just won the division. Now, they have lost a few members of their team from last year to free agency, but I do expect them to be up there. It's one of the most competitive divisions you'll see in football. It's really anyone's guess on who will win that division next season. Jordan Love and the Packers are primed to take the next leap forward after narrowly losing to the San Francisco 49ers, who ended up going all the way to the Super Bowl. The Packers have what it takes to be one of these up-and-coming teams to being a elite team that is a fringe Super Bowl contending team. With Jordan Love at quarterback, I saw a lot of big strides in his development, and he can throw on the move, and he gutted the Dallas defense in that excellent win in the wild card round. And for the most part, he looked similarly pretty good against the 49ers defense. Now, with that being said, still has some moves to be made to ascend up into that elite level in the NFC. And Detroit is still, I think, the favorite to win the NFC North. But with some moves recently, that definitely helps the Green Bay Packers out. Let's talk about bringing in Josh Jacobs. Now, that came on the back heel of releasing Aaron Jones, a longtime Green Bay Packer, and probably the engine of that offense before Jordan Love took over as being the true runner of that offense. But the fact that you have Josh Jacobs now, who is relatively been a pretty productive back, healthy as well, and he will be helpful to taking some pressure off. That is a guaranteed 4 yards per carry, and what Josh Jacobs can do is that and set up play action, which is Jordan Love's bread and butter. They have some very underrated weapons at the receiving room, and now with the signing of Xavier McKinney, that helps out the back end in their secondary. And I think with Jai Alexander's, depending on where, if he's released or remaining on the team, that is still a very helpful move. Xavier McKinney was probably the best safety in this free agency class, and him to get that over to Green Bay is a big help for the Green Bay Packers. I still give Detroit the nod, like I said, in the NFC North race, but certainly Green Bay is trending in the right direction to challenge the Detroit Lions. The Baltimore Ravens have signed Derrick Henry after several years over in Tennessee, and since 2018 onwards, he's led the league in rushing. But after a couple years where you could see that the Tennessee Titans were taking a different direction, their quarterback play basically evaporated up until the selection of Will Levis, and they seem to be going with somebody that can nurture his development. And with that being said, it just didn't feel right to keep Derrick Henry, especially at such a massive cap number. Now, he signs a 2-year deal worth about $60 million, certainly a bargain for a guy of Derrick Henry's caliber. Now, he certainly has been relatively healthy the last couple years after that 2021 season where he missed about half the year. But I do expect him to be an additional piece, because despite the Ravens losing Gus Edwards in free agency, this is probably the best replacement that you can have. And certainly Derrick Henry will get the lion's share of the carries, but definitely have Keaton Mitchell, whenever he comes back from the ACL injury, will be an excellent change of pace running back in that backfield. This will help Lamar as well, because the big thing that I've noticed with the Ravens is that they have a great defense. Passing game has taken some strides forward, but I still think they could use some extra pieces there. But the fact that the running game remains their go-to option is key. And without Gus Edwards, I think you just cannot run Lamar all the time. You need an actual back that demands 10 to 15 carries a game, mix that up with some Lamar plays out of the backfield, and then mix it up again with Keaton Mitchell. You always have Zay Flowers as well. He is a great toy to use in the backfield or out on the edge, but whatever the case may be. But the Ravens using this is pretty much a stable move, I think, for them, that they get a running back that has been consistent in this league, and this will certainly take off some pressure off of Lamar Jackson's shoulders. That's it for this episode of Spectator Sports. As always, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, to help us grow, we need your help. Like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Clips from this episode can be found here on YouTube in our playlist, as well as TikTok and Instagram. The full audio from this podcast you can get on Spotify. Like I said, all links are in the description. Thank you so much for Joey for editing this podcast, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.